Okay, that's what I counted. 10 wells. We have a number of groundwater springs. Most of them, we have up Battle Creek Canyon. There are currently 5 groundwater springs that feed into our system in varying degrees of effectiveness and source and how much flow comes from each of those, right? And then we're currently, with our Battle Creek Springs project, looking at maybe adding another 2 areas that we've put into our study, that if we can get in there and develop them, then we'll also bring those into the system. So we may have as many as 7 if we're effective at locating that and being able to find a good source enough that it makes sense to do. We will add an additional 2 locations up there.
And we would own those, all of the water that would come out of those?
Correct.
We would have all the shares?
Currently own, between us and Pleasant Grove Irrigation Company, own all the water that comes out of Battle Creek. So, and it's either through our culinary or irrigation water. So yes, everything that we develop up there would be coming down in our water rights that we own in Battle Creek Canyon. And so adding to that is going to be beneficial. Upgrading all of these, we're going to be able to develop them to get more source, which is going to help us with our pumping costs and bring in some really good clean water that comes out of Battle Creek. Absolutely, and that's built into our project, right? These 7 that we're trying to develop are all built into that project that we awarded. There are currently, also we have the Wade Springs, which comes into our system as well, kind of up there at the bike park, and that whole area comes in. We also have a Monson Spring that we've recently kind of taken out of the system and we put into the pressure irrigation system. We had a lot of problems with contamination from that area, and so we've decided that it's a very low source of water. There's not a lot of water from that, so that one come out. In whole, you can see that there's a number of pressure zones that the water system feeds. The green and the purple up on the bench we kind of refer to as the Battle Creek zone. There's a number of pressure zones in that, but it's the Battle Creek area. The area that's in the middle part of town we refer to as the Monson zone. And that's critical in how we kind of divide up the way that we do our testing and procedures with we do have to go, everything's reported, it's self-reported through the Division of Drinking Water, and we have to get from them approval of how we do that. So our testing procedures, the locations that we test, everything that you're seeing on this map is based on approved locations to be able to take those. They obviously want to see a widespread area that you're taking those samples from, and not specifically in any one area. So you can kind of see we're throughout that. We're currently listed as a system under 40,000. We take 40 bacteria samples every month, once a month. We also take 40 called chlorine residual samples. Now the bacteria samples, as soon as we go over, as I understand it, go over 40,000 in residential, we'll have to add another 20 sample sites to our system. They vary in cost. There is an extensive cost to do those samples every month. Is it $10 for the bacteria?
It used to be 10.
They raised it to 12 or 15 every month. So there's $400 plus we've got to do all the chlorine residuals. Plus if there's retests, if you find something. So I'll go through a little bit about that. But that's kind of the procedure that we go through every month. Every star that you see there is a house that has been identified as a location. We work with that resident. We ask them to come in. We usually take them on the outside of the house for this type of test, for the most part, at a tap on the outside of the house. And that's required by the Division of Drinking Water. So the question then, let's quickly talk. Our system, we have a chlorinator that comes into our system, so we do chlorinate our water, but we don't have any fluoridation in our water. So the whole thing you heard with Sandy is not an issue that we can really have. Not that we can't have high lead or copper in our water, but we won't get that because of fluoridation, like they had a malfunctioning fluoridation pump that caused that acidity that ate away at the copper and lead and brought it into the water system. We don't have that. Now, do we have copper and lead in our system? Absolutely. Every system does. But it's at a level that's almost, it's very, very low. Our testing levels for copper and lead have been increased to every 3 years we have to test for them, because in the past we have had very low levels to where they're not concerned. So they've expanded our testing requirements out to 3 years. Sandy, for example, I believe I read that they'll have to go to a 6-month testing on their copper and lead because of the issues they've had. They were probably at 3 years before that. We don't anticipate this year, in June, we'll be doing our copper and lead sampling. I probably should grab my water. So we'll be able to kind of have an updated sample, but in the past we've never had a bad copper or lead sample. Thank you. Maybe this will help me not talk as long. Is that what you're thinking? It's like, if you don't give him water, he'll sit down.
Wow, harsh crowd.
Hey, it's like this at every meeting I go to. I'm happy to sit down whenever you'd like.
No, we're good.
We do have a drinking water report that we put out every year that kind of lists any violations that we have had in the system. This past year, totally clean, no violations, nothing that was of concern in the entire system. So we've got a clean report, and that's happened for a number of years. There's a lot of things that can happen when you're taking those bacteria tests, specifically with the method that you're acquiring the sample. It has to be very clean, because even a little smudge of anything will set off that test as being bad. I'll go into that really quick in a minute here, but in general, the water system is being managed correctly, properly. The procedures are there to be able to handle issues if they are found, and very comfortable with that and how we would do that. So 40 bacteria tests. This is something that takes 2 to 4 days, just kind of depending on the severity of that. Once we get those bacteria tests, we refrigerate them. They have to be maintained at a certain level, and then we take them to, right now we take them to Richard's lab right here on First East in Pleasant Grove. It's nice to have a local lab that we can take those to. They turn those around generally within 24 hours. We get a result back of whether or not there's anything what they call coliform, which is a bacteria that's an indicator bacteria that tells you whether or not you might have E. coli or some other bacteria that may be more harmful in your system. So last year we had 0 coliform positive test samples in our system. If you get a positive test sample in your system, and I brought these guys because these guys are the experts on how to do that, but they essentially will require within 24 hours of that test you go back out and retest at the same location. You typically will take a test in the houses upstream and downstream as well, just to kind of start the procedure that if there is further contamination that you've already started that procedure. You don't typically test for E. coli on a first test of if you find a coliform positive sample. Sometimes they do, typically they don't. Then on the second test, if it's found coliform positive, they would immediately go to a bacteria test. The bacteria test is where they would, an E. coli test. If it's found positive for E. coli, there is an immediate response required that we go and notify publicly about that contamination. It's not fun, it's not easy. There's a process. We would notify the state, would notify the health department, we would notify the residents through social media, Facebook, plus probably door hangers if needed. On the news is typically the way it's done, because you've got to be able to reach everybody, and there can't be somebody that's left out of that procedure. So we can't just say, well, we posted it at the city hall and call it good, right? We're going to be in depth trying to get everybody notified as far as a boil order, not to drink their water. We don't want anybody getting sick if that was found. And so there is a process typically within, again, we do those 40 sites. If we find it after you've found E. coli, then there's a whole process of trying to isolate the source of that contamination. And sometimes it can be something as simple as very localized to the house that you're testing. So you might do that first test, coliform positive. You do your second test, coliform positive there, but not at the adjacent homes. Or even if you find it coliform positive at the adjacent homes, maybe they are the only ones with the E. coli problem. because maybe they had their pipes changed, maybe they put in a water softener, they did some work on their system coming into their home, and we're taking it from their tap water that's going through their system. So if they've done that, there's a chance, if they haven't properly flushed, that we could get a E. coli positive sample. Doesn't necessarily mean that the whole system is contaminated or that we've got a big problem. But we would take the necessary actions when we find that to quickly verify that we don't have a bigger system problem as far as the whole system. Really, if it gets outside of that, would be testing our source locations, all of the wells that we're pumping into the system, all of the springs that are coming into the system. And there's a whole process that we would follow in going out and getting those and trying to identify the source as quick as possible. Yes?
Testing, Sandy kept saying that it was test and then it would be 2-3 days results. So I know that we take a sample and we run it to Salt Lake. Salt Lake then does the testing. Is there a faster response?
They're taking a different sample when you're doing copper and lead and fluoride. There may be, I don't know if Richard's Labs handles that type of test, and maybe that would be required to go.
Response.
Yeah,
okay.
They look at it within 24 hours and get. That's probably our highest risk. We have a backflow prevention process, right? If somebody comes in, for example, and cross-connects the PI system into the culinary water system, and we somehow get pressures or coming back through a system, huge risk for us to be able to contaminate an area from the pressure irrigation system. And so very important that we have a good backflow prevention process. We're informing people you don't make these connections. We're enforcing that stringently that doesn't happen. And so that's important for our system as well, that we make sure that any points of potential contamination are well, identified and just taken care of, that doesn't happen.
Sounds like between the 24 and 48 hours is the key time, right? And starting to reach out to people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There are times for the test to come back, and your first test is typically coliform. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a problem. That just says there's an indicator here that there may be a problem. Do further testing. And then that next test, so that could take up to 24 to 48 hours to get that final test back of whether or not there's something that's serious or going to cause a health problem.
So do you think our notification methods are adequate, or do we need to improve upon? Because when we listened to this lady yesterday, it was just all out craziness of how they thought they had it handled and they not even close.
Their downfall was communication. They did not have a plan in place at all. And that it just spun out of control. So do we have a plan? And speaking to that, Chief Roberts, where are we at with getting CERT up and going in the neighborhoods and just utilizing, that Everbridge, and are we, it's in place, but do we have those CERT people, and where are we at so they can be resources when an emergency happens? Okay.
So,
see, but I didn't know that, and that's awesome that we have that in place. But that's just, I think, part of the communication that we know. So if somebody, because I'll get questions about what our emergency plan is for the city, and it's good to know we have. Can you send us who's on CERT? Is there one for each neighborhood? Okay. Okay.
And maybe it would be good for us to have Lindsay come in.
I would love that.
Is our first when our first notification that something is wrong, is that somebody getting sick?
it can be, but not always the case, right? It may not be if it's an isolated incident or to a certain area. But if anybody has any question about taste, odor, the look of it or something like that, they can always call us and we can come out and do an individual test, have them run it at the lab. It's something that we would regularly do if we found an issue, and we do get those calls.
I do love that, and I think that probably needs to be a calming fear of knowing, hey, if something doesn't smell right, if something doesn't taste right, it's coming out of your faucet, call this number.
And I believe that's how Sandy said that they were first notified, was that somebody called and
Yes.
said, hey, this tastes weird, and
Weird.
we want somebody
And my
to come and
dog
check this
just
out.
fell over.
Yeah,
That was the first clue.
so,
Communications, maybe reach out to the high school or the schools. They have some good communications there, right? That they reach out, and they have a lot of contact numbers. So
right. I think with the Everbridge concept, I mean, when you come to a waterborne disease, it's one of those things that you don't mess around with, and you kind of just put all of the information out there. So you have to deal with all of the avenues of communication, and it's not going to reach grandma that's in her home if we're just doing it on social media, maybe the news, other things like that. So I think when we start talking about, yes, we found that there is something that's harmful, we have a health problem here, we need to get out all sources, you know, whether or not that's a door hanger to people. If we've isolated the area, we can go and flood that area with door hangers, social media, TV, all of that.
And that is one thing that Sandy did, is they sent first responders door to door. But do we know who's going to mobilize that, who it's going to be, who's in charge? Like, do we have the whole plan in place and ready to go? Maybe that's a
Public
discussion
Works, I mean, our process at Public Works, we've got our whole department that would be involved. I don't know, I know that we've worked with the police department, for example, of Everbridge, and going and identifying the area to send out a notification if there was an area. So I think the whole concept of the policy is there. I don't know that it's written, Sid, as far as a direct, here's what we do, standard operating procedures, here we go.
And that's one thing that Sandy said, is it was the disconnect and lack of communication between agencies and departments. No one really knew, each kind of had their own thing going, but wasn't communicating with anyone else, and that's where they kind of fell apart. And whether it's between us and the school district to use their Skyward system to get out, or us and Everbridge, or, you know, whatever it is. So maybe that is something we need to get in writing, and so we're on the same page. So Scott knows, you know, like the chief knows, like everyone knows in writing what the step-by-step procedure is, and there's no question when the time comes, because an emergency will happen. It's probably not a matter of if but when. We are ready to go, and I think it would be great to communicate that to the residents, to say we have our plan in place and this is what it is. Everything. Mm-hmm.
It is actually using the media. She said that the media was not their friend because they had fallen so far behind. But in a case where you're proactive,
Right.
the news media is your friend.
They notified the media
Right.
Right.
not the first day.
Right.
The first day, because you
Right.
and they'll get that.
We had one in Linden a couple years
Yeah.
ago.
And so they do that.
But we
Just
did.
need to make sure they're notified.
But we need to identify who's going to notify them, because it could be, well, I thought, you know, and it kind of goes in a big circle. It sounds like we have a general plan in place, but we need just the specifics of who, what, when, where. I mean, I think if we got those down in writing, then I'd feel good about an emergency. I mean, we have the resources in place. We just need to make sure everyone's communicating about how to utilize those.
Another point of interest is that with their Everbridge, they found out that they didn't have as many email texts as they thought they did. And so, and I don't know how we increase that. She was talking about mandatory contact information on a utility bill, but, you know, they send it out, and they were only hitting a fraction of who they needed to contact.
And it needs to reach everybody, and that's the problem with these things. It's like as fast as possible, get it out to everybody.
No.
So, That's just one of the many things that you have to.
So is that a campaign, an emergency campaign that maybe we can run in the summer that says, if you want to know about water boiling, sign here, sign up?
Anything else, Marty?
I think I'm good.
No.
Do you guys have any questions?
Well,
Happy to
I
answer
have
any questions.
more than
you wanted to know?
ever have. Yeah, that works.
Just take for granted when you turn that tap on, that's, hey, that's good water. Now, understand that if we have a major pipe burst, we could get contamination in that way, but we rectify that and follow that and flush everything out. And the other is if somebody cross connects our pressure irrigation without a backflow preventer. And have we had any of those where we've had some?
Had a couple, but I think they've been very locally dealt with. Like, I don't think we've contaminated any part of the system with those, but we have had some bad tests due to them, and so we've had to try to isolate and find what was causing those things. Those were before I came, but I've heard of them in our discussion.
They weren't too bad. When that former put it.
A lot of education.
Okay. Well, then, only thing we're putting in our pipe is chlorine, right? So what happens if we got a chlorinator that goes rogue? Well, you can smell it usually.
Yeah, that's the thing with chlorine is that it comes up pretty quick that, hey, this tastes like a swimming pool, you know, and we've got some problems. We're notified fairly quick, but we would have to isolate. And we have very few locations that you can get chlorine into the system, so we can quickly check those. Compared to something that might be a source contamination or a cross contamination, it's all buried. It's all difficult to find. You have to go up and search and test and try to isolate and take valves and take, systems out of order so that you can test them properly. So
I did not know that we were not adding fluoride, and that just makes me so happy.
So I believe there are only 2 counties that require it, and that's Salt Lake and Davis counties. The only one that we found in Utah County, I think Jason kind of looked that up, is Cedar Fort, that fluorides in Utah County that we're aware of. Too many other concerns. So.
Well, that's
I'm
good.
sorry, you're just going to have
No, I
teeth
want
like the
this.
British, okay?
I'm okay with that. But I didn't know that. I'm so happy.
But they do mandate it as part of the county. Does mandate that anybody serving water in those counties is required to fluoridate. So it could come from a county. They're the ones responsible for having that vote saying we're going to make everybody do this. Well, Utah County hasn't been pushing it and plan on it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You want to?
Wait, why are we coughing?
It was a good presentation.
It was a good presentation.
I feel good.
I feel good. We feel good about
Okay.
our water.
Pay attention here. We're going over the agenda tonight.
We're ready.
Okay?
We give Marty a hard time, but that was good information. And
The thing is, he's long-winded, but it's always good
it
information.
is good. It's good stuff. No, I'm with you. I agree 100% with what you're saying.
It's important. It really is.
Okay, so for tonight, we're going to kind of change up our agenda here a little bit for the city council meeting. After item number 4, when we approve the meeting agenda, I would like to do the presentation to Judge Bullock before we do our open session, so that we can take care of that and we can move him on so he doesn't have to sit here through some of the meeting.
Or we could put him at the end.
I know, now that he's retired, he just gets
Plenty of time.
I'm sure he would love to sit through our whole meeting. He might just walk out. He might just say, okay, that's all right, I don't need the
I'm outta
award. I'm out of here. And then we'll do our open session. And then we do have on our agenda 3 public hearings, but 9A and B are going to be continued to April 9th. So when we approve the agenda, we'll recommend that those two items. What this is an annexation. When they submitted their initial plat, there was one small little piece of property that would have been this small little island of county property between American Fork and Pleasant Grove. So we've asked them to amend their plat to include that small piece of property and just annex the whole thing in. So they are making those changes, but because of that, it's going to push that back into April. 9C is a public hearing to discuss our permitted conditional and accessory uses in our manufacturing zone. We have a couple of uses in there that as staff we're recommending that we take out, and the Planning Commission is unanimous on where we're at. But so examples of uses that we're asking to be removed would be a transfer station, recycling operation, meat packing plant, and what was the last one, Daniel? Dairy operation.
No more dairy?
No,
says the farmer.
you can still drink milk, you just can't produce it in the manufacturing zone.
You're grandfathered in, aren't you?
In our manufacturing zone.
Hey,
Oh, you're not in manufacturing.
well, hey, do you think I'd ever have a milk cow after growing up with two of them?
No, you got to wake up early to milk them.
Yeah. That's why you go to Macy's.
So with that, we do have a transfer station that's coming to town. They will be a legal non-conforming use at that point. Is that the correct terminology, Tina? So they'll continue to operate. However, if we get a second application, or if this group wants to expand on their site, they will not be allowed to do that. So that is, we'll go over that tonight. There'll be a public hearing, and Daniel will give you the details on that. On 10A, A, B, and C are all related. 10A is our agreement with the Metro Water of Salt Lake and Sandy to do some blow-off sites. As part of the trail system that we've been putting in, we receive an easement through them to put trail on their property. In exchange, they wanted to use some of the area out there to be able to blow off some of their water lines. And so Marty will present on the blow-off systems and explain what that is. Item B is the agreement between us and Metro Water so that we can put in phase 2 of the Valley Vista Trail. And then item C is awarding the bid on the trail so that we can start construction of the trail here in April. So we'll go over, none of these are public hearings, but we'll address all those, but they're all related to the trail system. And then item 10D is our resolution to receive just under $20,000 from the Utah County recreation grant that we get every year, with the intention of using that for the downtown park. Are there any questions about the remaining agenda? Okay, so that's all we have for work session, Mayor.
If not, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn and our work session, and then we'll reconvene at 6 o'clock. Do I have a motion?
I make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So what's still, you're not going to the pillar of the,
I turned down
you were going to represent us there tonight.
David Archuleta even.
Well, you asked me if I was going to.
No, you came for the water.